Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to Hot Talks. Before I begin, actually, I just want to say that my building's fire alarm went off like 3 minutes before our tech check-in. So I'm a little bit discombobulated. There was no fire. The firemen have come and gone, but I'm a little bit all over the place. I had to rush and get back into this chair for Hot Pot Talks. So
Listen, you were outside, well, downstairs outside your building. I fully was ready to like ad lib and was ready to buy us time should you needed to get back into your building.
Thankfully, we're all good. But thanks everyone. So welcome to Hot Pot Talks. My name is David Ng, and this is my dear friend and longtime creative partner, Jen Sungshine. You might know us as the co-founders and co-artistic directors of Love Intersections, a media arts collective that produces documentary film about QT BIPOCs in our community. We're also members of Vancouver Artists Labor Union of the Vancouver Artists Labor Union Cooperative, also known as Value Co-op. Before we begin, we also want to acknowledge that Jen and I are beaming this live stream from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations.
We have finally arrived, okay, at the grand finale. Sorry, just before we started, I actually got a laughing. I was in a laughing fit, and so I might not be able to contain my laughter throughout this talk, which is a series live streaming to YouTube and Facebook every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, where we had free-flowing conversations with artists, activists, chefs, performers, poets, community organizers, a PhD even, about what it means to be an artist facing today's realities, what ethical responsibilities do we have as artists, what community organizing and art making looks like during quarantine, and all the while sharing our favorite hot pot ingredients. Tonight looks a little bit different because it's the finale with just David and myself. We'll be reflecting on past guests and ask each other lots of questions and have our own free-flowing conversation.
Yeah. So why Hot Pot Talks? As I mentioned, Jen and I are part of Value Co-op, and our studio is located in the Lim Sai Hor Khao Mok Benevolent Association in Vancouver's Chinatown. And so we knew that, when we were moving into Chinatown and recognizing the ways that artists have often contributed to gentrification, we had long conversations about how we wanted to be proactive, or how we could be proactive with our arts practice and organizing to be generative in building relationships in the community. And so Jen and I are part of the community projects working group, when we're doing a collaboration with the Lim Association, with the elders on the board, whom I've known for a very long time, on a project called Engaging Chinatown, where we'll be digitizing their archives and then turning it into a visual art exhibit. Well, it was going to be a public, immersive visual art exhibit, but of course, COVID had other ideas. And so Hot Pot Talks is sort of one of the ways that we are reimagining connection and connecting with people about these issues related to Chinatown and diaspora.
So in thinking about these themes of nourishment and love, we love to shameless plug our favorite limited edition tote bags. They are still available for purchase. Have you eaten today simply means I love you in BIPOC language. A simple question asked by so many of our parents, elders, and aunties everywhere, evoking a shared familial understanding of love and tenderness. And these feelings of unspoken care inspired Hot Pot Talks, where culture and community nourish our bodies and for our hearts too. I want to...
Also, sorry, if I may mention, these totes are only going to be on sale for another few days, so buy them now.
I want to finally thank our incredible team of practicum students who have made this Hot Pot Talks a reality and an incredible possibility. Thank you, Lamia, Cameron, Ava, Yeska, and Victoria. We couldn't have done it without you all.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so David, let's just get into it, because we've got an hour of conversation. I don't know who's tuning in and who cares, but I want to start by reflecting on our very first guest at the beginning of the Hot Pot Talk series, whose name was Claire Yao, founder of United Aunties. I remember what date was it? It was like February. It was like during Lunar New Year, I think, or the week before Lunar New Year. So we were so nervous. Do you remember? Because she was our first guest, and we really didn't know how the format and how the series was gonna go. But I just thought, you know, it was in so many ways such an experiment, and it was really cute too. I'm just reflecting now. I'm just remembering because I was watching it today. I just thought it was really cute and heartwarming that she pointed out that her parents were tuning in from Ontario. And I think what was really lovely too was that we started that conversation with Claire, and Claire's origin story with Hot Pot. And that kind of jump-started this kind of consistent question that we would then come back to ask every single guest thereafter. Like, what's your Hot Pot origin story? And like, what's your favorite Hot Pot ingredient? So I thought that was so amazing.
Yeah. And, you know, it came up actually in conversation because also like we realized, I mean, I don't know why. I mean, I assumed that all hot pot was the same. And like, I remember even Jen, when we did a tasting of the hot pot dipping sauces of our panelists on Sunday. And I remember even just watching you do hot pot, and I was like, oh, you do it that way? You know, like the boiling, you know, and we all of course have different sort of relationships with hot pot. Everyone does it differently because everyone has different practices of sharing food together, right? Yeah, that was a really great conversation.
And actually, you know, in thinking about Claire, I remember us kind of gushing about the word aunties because we identified and resonate so much with that term. And so when we asked Claire about it, you know, and she said something to the effect of, you know, when she had her son Theo, she was like really touched and moved by like the aunties that were around her, like ostensibly like friends and community members who you know, who like really came through for her and for her family with hand-me-downs and food and just like care and warmth. And so she was like, these are Theo's aunties, right? And so she was able to connect to, you know, the creation of United Aunties, which is about honoring the spirit of giving and care, and that anyone can channel the spirit of an auntie. So I thought that was really cute because I totally resonate with that. And I think for you and I, like, I think I'm going to be that weirdo auntie activist forever, right? Like I spoke about this during Claire's Hot Pot Talk, where I said that, you know, I'm the fairy godmother to my future, to my best friend's future kids. And, you know, it's something that I hold true to this day because I have no intention of having my own kids, right?
Yeah, no, it's a you know, the kids conversation has been something that I've been thinking about a lot. Like I've agreed to be a sperm donor to actually more than one couple, but it's sort of it feels weird actually.
I love how you just dropped this bomb on us. Of course, I know it all. There's no surprises when it comes to things that you share, but you can't just drop this.
Well, it's for the discourse, okay? But I've been thinking about this a lot because, you know, I don't want children, and I it's not that I, you know, have problems with children. I just don't. It's not for me. I've never have, and I think that's okay. But I've also I've struggled with it too because, you know, I was in relationships with people that told me that it was going to be a phase, or there were people around me that said, no, you'll want kids one day. You'll want kids one day. And so when I agreed to be a sperm donor and thinking about what that means and, like, you know, insecurities kind of about this sort of, you know, this big decision, right? And what that might mean for me and this person that's going to have my genes, right? What might that look like? And I think a lot of those pressures came from, I mentioned, like, people just, social pressures of people thinking, oh, you'll grow out of this phase. And then there's also like just pressures from, I grew up in a environment where there was a lot of pressures on the nuclear family. Like that was stability, quote unquote, right? And so I had to undo a lot of that, I think, and really just come back down to it. I think it was this narrative in my brain that I was producing offspring, which I'm not, right? I'm donating genetic material, and I share genetic material with a lot of other people too. So
you sound like a scientist, genetic material. But I know your husband's a scientist. So.
Yes, and I don't want to be so heartless about it, and I don't mean it like I chose to do it because I also want to be there for when this person grows up and looks in the mirror and wants to know, why do I look this way? Or I want to know this, if they want to know, I want to be there for them. Just hopefully they'll have taken Women's Studies 101 and we can have a conversation about feminism at that point. But I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I think there's also a gender component, because I have had this debate with many people, and I'm not trying to reduce like the realities and the harshness of that reality that you face, but I have had people, because I have always known that I didn't want kids. And in fact, I will share my whole family trajectory in terms of why I don't want to have kids. And kind of tie in my parents and how I was raised. But like the pressures as like a cis woman and a queer cis woman, where society largely is expecting you to have kids, and this whole idea that you'll be dried up in your, by the time you're in your 30s. So you got to start thinking about all of these things, and you'll have regrets and all of those things. I'm like, no, I know. I have known for a very long time, since I was very little. But the worst, and still one of the most traumatic things that a cis man has ever said to me, a cis straight man has ever said to me was, oh, you'll just change your mind, and then you'll be too embarrassed to admit that you are wrong. And I was like, that to this day, it's been like 7 years since that person said that to me. And to this day, it's still is seared. It's like seared in my mind. And still, it makes me so furious that some cis straight guy, questioned me, but also questioned, like, under his logic, if my like baby fever brain was so all encompassing and so powerful, wouldn't I just like have to have a baby anyway, like regardless of my pride and ego? Anyway, I could go on and on, but to the point, I think, you're raised around like being raised in a Christian environment. I too, in a kind of a different spiritual environment. And this is my parents. Are like, they raised me Buddhist, and they're Buddhist. And so growing up, I just distinctly remember them saying, don't have kids and don't get married, which is such a unconventional thing for like Taiwanese parents to say to their only child. And so I think it's interesting because I think there's lots of reasons why they think that. Predominantly, there's this kind of concept of like human suffering. So I like to think that, when I saw this meme recently, and it just reads, I don't think I'll have kids invites arguments, and versus this bloodline dies with me is super metal, is metal as hell, and implies you're taking on a great and noble burden, which allows no argument. And I resonated so hard with that tweet. It was so great. Because, and that's in some ways what my parents are kind of, encouraging. And I've had at length many conversations with them around that. And one of the conversations that I had in the last like couple of years, and it's in this many ways like a very philosophical conversation, of like not just like a parent child, but also like as like adults, you know. I was having coffee with my with my mom, and I kind of shared that, yeah, you and dad, like you guys, you know, I grew up hearing that you said don't get married and don't have children. Well, the next day, my mom kind of came back to me and was like, oh, dad was really upset because he thought that he had, you know, like influenced me and like, you know, was like, you know, like this is a requirement, da 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 da. He felt so bad, and I said, no. It would be a totally different story had I wanted to have kids or you know, get married. But I agree with you, and I don't. So there's no issue here. And we were talking for so long in this like beautiful adult philosophical way that my mom was able to share, you know, like if I had the choice, we probably wouldn't have you. And I just thought that was one of the most profound experiences of a conversation that I've ever had with anybody, because of course I know that they love me. Of course they, you know, that the love is still there, but I can also hold like the contradiction right at hand, where if they chose to not have me, my very existence would not, you know, be in, you know, on this earth. And I just found that was one of the most incredibly powerful moments that I ever shared with my parents, was that they trusted me enough, and then they loved me enough to be able to be so honest with me, you know, in this like almost deeply spiritual way. So anyway, long story short, I think that, you know, these conversations need to have, and I think parents also need to have this conversation more openly. And I think that they are having that more often now around choice and around whether they want to have kids or not. And sometimes there are regrets, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think, Jen, you know, this is sort of one of the things I think that you and I bonded on right off the bat when we first met, was this sort of like unconventional, or we don't sort of fit several stereotypes in many different ways, but particularly I think around our relationship with being Asian too, whatever that means, right? Whatever those stereotypes are or not. I mean, I had a comment literally, and it's very curious to me about these stereotypes, because I had a comment today actually about, it came up in conversation about how I came out, and this person asked, like, is it different for you in the Asian culture? And you know, it was a lovely conversation. So I'm not antagonizing this person, but I'm bringing it up in the sense that, you know, there are projections and perceptions of how we grow up, and I think about, like, you know, Jen, when you were sharing like how your parents shared with you, I think about, like, you know, my parents were also not the type of stereotypical tiger parents, you know, and they've never talked to us about having kids. They said that they like children, but that wasn't like, and to be fair, you know, I'm queer and I don't want children, and I've said that since I was young. Maybe they're having different conversations with my brother and my sister. I don't know. But I also felt that it was, you know, when I did grow up, and I grew up in when I went to high school with a lot of other Chinese Asian people, and a lot of them did share with me some pressures that they had around even what their parents wanted them to study. And my parents were pretty open about what I wanted to do. I think they were mostly concerned, like, what are you going to do with a women's studies degree? How are you going to feed yourself? Is really have you eaten today? How are you going to feed yourself?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, but I've also had some really lovely conversations, like, around, like, so Jen, you and I were talking also about, like, what our journey with our own cultures, right? And I was like, let's just put it this way. When I went to Hong Kong, I got carded on the street because they were like, you don't look like you're from here. Like, literally carded on the street, right? And I'm making this joke to say that, like, you know, I have had a journey of trying to figure out or learn Chinese culture, largely also because in the religion that I grew up with, a lot of the practices of like animism and some other traditions are considered pagan. So they were either modified or sort of not practiced. So
yes.
but I had this really lovely conversation, funny and also lovely conversation with my mom, because my cousin's getting married, and my cousin Kai's getting married, and I checked her Instagram and it's public, so I can talk about it. But we were talking about, you know, our cultural practices, like wedding practices, right? And I immediately called my mom because I was like, I know of some of them, but like I don't know which ones. What do they mean, right? What does the tea ceremony mean? What does the betrothal ceremony mean? All of these questions. And I called my mom and I said, well, which ones did you do? Or how did you know which ones to do? Which ones did you do and how did you know? Because for some reason, I just have this sort of like idea that my parents know everything, every single thing about Chinese culture. And of course they don't, right? And my mom was like, I had no idea. I had to ask the elders around me. And we had this really nice moment of like, you know, I was like, yeah, and that's why I'm also asking you, right? And so it was this really nice moment of just like seeing each other, I think, as human and thinking. Now I'm gonna get emotional. But thinking like she was like me at one point, you know, 35. Trying to figure out her culture, right? Anyway, now I'm gonna cry.
My God, let the record show that David Ng is crying. I have not ever experienced a time where it's David that's crying and not me that's crying. So I don't mean to, you know, belittle your tears, but I am loving this moment. It's also just beautiful. Thank you.
We're talking about our moms, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I think that people would be they would love to just hear about like our relationship. And when I say our relationship, I really do mean the relationship that you and I have is just like beautiful and it's so deep. Like, you know, in prepping for today, I was thinking about like, I was wanting to make a joke. Like, I don't even know what burning questions I would ask you because I feel like I know so much about you and you know so much about me and that there's very little surprises nowadays after 7 years, you know, but every once in a while, there are these moments of beauty and like moments of surprise where I'm just like, wow, there's still so much that I actually don't know about you. Yeah. And the depth of emotion you bring to everything that you do constantly surprises me. And just like, I just feel so grateful to be able to truly work in collaboration with you. You know, it's been 7 years, which is so wild to me. Okay, Johnny, how did you two meet? You know,
okay, that's a good story.
You're dating us, but so the story is
it's a good story, though.
It's a great story because we joke that I picked David up. So I was presenting on some panel at Media Democracy Day at the Vancouver Public Library. And so I'm just walking through the atrium. And so at the time, so the Media Democracy Day, I think it's like over like a weekend, right? And so they invite like organizations, a lot of nonprofit organizations to table in the atrium while they are concurrent workshops and panels happening like downstairs in the like rooms, like Alice McKay room or what have you. And so I'm walking through the atrium to like quickly get to the like downstairs area where I'm on some panel. And I just see this beautiful man standing behind a table. And I was like, who are you? And so I approached the table and I guess you were tabling for Hello Cool World, which I'll let you take over the story in a sec. But I just remember being like, I just have a feeling about this person and I would love to, if he's indeed, I'm just like reading queerness, you know, I'm just like, if he is indeed queer, I would love to just talk to him and like hire him At the time I was working at Out in Schools, and I was like, look, always constantly looking for new facilitators. So I was like, I gotta speak to this man. Anyway, you can.
Well, I think how you just described it to me was like, we struck up a conversation, and I had just finished grad school, or I had just finished my master's degree. I just moved back to Vancouver, and you were asking me like, what did I study? And I think I told you I was like, gender studies, and you're like,
yes!
gay. not that all cis men who take gender studies is gay, but anyways, we connected, and I think, yeah, so, and then I was also really curious about and wanting to work at Out in Schools too, and then the Vancouver School Board controversy happened, and we bonded over a lot of the racism actually that was being directed towards Chinese people, and narratives that were being made about us, or made about Asian people, yeah, started Love Intersections as a blog. Do you remember those?
Yeah, we started Love Intersections as a blog. We wrote a couple of essays that went viral, and essentially we turned that into like short, digestible, videos, so that we wanted to self-represent, right? Because we were so tired of the harmful stereotypes out there about queer Asians, that we wanted to like just diversify the content that's out there and diversify the narratives that are out there about us. And I actually was thinking about how to tie this back to the second Hot Pot Talk that we did with the Dumpling King, but I'm gonna skip to the third one, because the way that I noticed Nira, Ellie, Annie Kanto, and Amanda Wind, and how they had their own banter, their friendship really reminded me of like you and I's friendship, and so I thought I'd make that connection. Not that I'm just so glad we're doing this.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, so we've touched on sort of Asian, our connections to our own culture. We also released this, just another shout out to Haina Wan again. Oh my God, we dropped this, they designed this amazing like cyborg image that they designed for us, which we really, really loved. I feel like, and so Jen, we were talking about like, we really wanted to talk about futurities, queer Asian futurities. And, Hot Pot Talks, I've been sitting with this quite a bit lately because, Hot Pot Talks, we've touched on themes. The genesis was to talk about Chinatown's diaspora, complicating Chinatowns. Like I'm thinking about our conversation with T-Base and Tao especially. And when I think about like queer Asian futures, like we're also in a particular moment of anti-racism, anti-Asian racism discourse right now. And it feels amiss if we didn't at least discuss it in some, because there's been a lot of thoughts that have come up for me. Like I'm thinking about, I've been watching a lot of conversations happen online, especially from, our community, like in the social justice community, around like unpacking the positionality of Asians. And, the really important pushback on, there's been sort of a reaction from some Asian communities to increase police and law enforcement as a solution for anti-Asian hate crimes. And of course, connecting this to how the police harm Black communities, right? And I'm also thinking about conversations. I've seen a couple conversations, and we've talked about this too, about like the model minority and being white adjacent. So some currencies that some, and I emphasize some, Asians can access certain currencies to access certain types of privilege as well, right? And at the same time, I'm thinking about like recognizing like that some Asians, if we can even generalize the term Asians, are also excluded from those currencies. Like I'm thinking about the victims in Atlanta, for example, like working class sex workers who are not a model minority, right? So there's lots of rich conversations happening there. But like one of the frustrations that I have, well, maybe not a frustrations, but one of the things that I see is also it ends up there, or it ends up as sort of like a recognition of the hierarchies of race, and interrogating where Asians are situated and how we're complicit or can be complicit or complacent within a white supremacist system. Yet the conversation kind of ends there, or leads to, and therefore we need to be in solidarity with Black and Indigenous communities, which is important. But like, I feel like that's not good enough. Like we've got to be doing more? And like, and what I mean by that is like, you know, how do one of the questions that comes up for me in our work is like, how do we transform or shift away from the colonial logics that underpin the systems of white supremacy, right? While being in solidarity with Black and Indigenous communities. Like, why are we always sort of re-articulating these racial hierarchies? We have to recognize them and sort of interrogate how we're positioned in them, of course. But we should also be interrogating the logics that underpin them too, right?
Well, because I think the default is to utilize identity politics, to weaponize identity politics in such a way. And so the identity markers are constantly like thrown in people's faces, which simultaneously silences the people. You know, what am I doing? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like, you know, totally. Like this conversation, you know, I've seen conversations of like, you know, we Asians, we need to be careful. We need to not take up so much space, right? Like, and I agree. I totally agree. You know, but I think there's a better way around it too. Like, there's a way that we can speak about our oppression, yet at the same time be in solidarity with Black and Indigenous communities. And I'm naming those because those are also obviously at the forefront of a lot of struggles right now too, even more so than it says, you know, but I feel like we can also show up in an intersectional way without having to remain silent about anti-Asian oppression too, right? Like, and at the same time, like I was watching, this is so complicated because I've also then I didn't attend the anti-Asian racism rally in Vancouver, but like I saw signs of Asian people that said like, we build Canada together, you know, like, and we got to address that too, right? Like, what is the support for the nation state and law enforcement? Like that needs to be interrogated as well, right? Another point I was thinking about too was like this idea of undoing colonial logics. Like this is something that I've been thinking about a lot because I'm in school, if you can't tell from this nerdy conversation.
So amazing. And as we were prepping this, I was like saying to David, I'm not very confident right now in my theory, and I'm not very confident right now in just like overall, like my imposter syndrome is at an all-time high. So I was like, David, if you want to pop off on theory, please do. Like, I also felt so like I don't know how to add to the conversation, but I think you're right. I would love for you to unpack that a little bit in terms of what you mean, because I know you were going to get there.
Yeah, like, and I'm not pretending like I have the answers, and I'm really just complicating. Like, I think that all of those threads that I've brought up, like, there's so much that of there that I want to hold and be like complicate as well, and sit with as well. But I like one of the things that I've been thinking about, like, and this is connected to some of the work that we've been thinking about at Value Co-op too, is how do we place values, and how do we undo colonial and white supremacist values? And I'm thinking specifically around our arts practices, and specifically our arts practice. I mean, Jen, this is why the main reason why I'm doing a PhD is because we over the past 7 years, and even prior in other work that I've done, so much of the work that we do at Love Intersections, this nebulous sort of, I don't know how it gets classified in the art world, but it doesn't get classified as art. The value, it's not legible in much of the art world, quote unquote. It gets sort of relegated to some sort of category, some sort of weird category that is, I don't know how they've determined it. And so I've been reading this work because I'm thinking about a methodology. How in my research am I going to interrogate those metrics that exclude us? And also thinking though, like, why am I trying to fit my arts practice in the institution that has excluded me? Why am I not actually trying to change those logics, right? And so I connect this back to like the colonial logics that I was thinking about before, right? Like, how can we sort of challenge the foundations of white supremacy, and not only, I don't want to say reproduce them, but just also work within the hierarchy that is founded on white supremacy. Like, I think it happens at the same time. We recognize and interrogate that system, but also undo the foundations of that system too, right?
So
and reshift the values.
How do we do that again?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't have the answers, but I feel like there's like I'm bumping up right now into like the words I think can do certain things, right? But I also think about like there's also things that arts and practice and embodied practices can move us to feel differently. I'm not a performance artist, but like when I watch the work of many performance artists, I'm thinking of like Peter Morin and Ayumi Goto, Haruko Okano, Sami Chan, right? Like that work is that embodied work moves us in different ways. And so I'm curious, how can we move outside of those? Can our arts practice be a conduit for that think or that shifting? I'm thinking of also the work of like Elwood Jimmy and Vanessa Andriotti, where they're also thinking about it's different, but also they're also thinking about how arts practices can, and other indigenous practices can also move us away from I think they're thinking about it through colonial entitlements. And thinking about our relationships to not only just humans, but also to non-humans and the planet. Anyway, end of rant. I just wanted to sort of, I felt like there's so much of our conversations in Hot Pot Talks, and considering especially the recent events right now, there's an energy happening around anti-Asian racism. There's a lot of it. But there's these sort of difficult but important threads to think about. Anyway,
that wasn't even a rant. That was just like a really beautiful discourse, if you want to call it that. I think a lot about the answer, and I don't presume to have the answer either, but I think a lot about like how we do relationships. And when we say that we focus on all of our work, whether that's our artwork, film work, organizational, administrative work, all of it is rooted in our capacity to form and forge and maintain and sustain relationships. It does not mean, when I say that this is what we focus on, this is what we do, does not mean we then don't make mistakes in the relationship process. But I think about like how many lessons that I've learned just in the past 3 years alone, in the failed relationships that we've had with community members, with successful relationships that we've had that continue to evolve through to this day and will continue to evolve more and deepen. I just think about all of the ways in which we have like come so far and yet have so much more to kind of like go through. And so that's leading me into thinking about how we think about futurity, and especially in this way, in this context of queer Asian futurity, because I have to think about what is the history of like not just our ancestral history, our political history, but what is like the history that we have like formed together, you and I, each of us bringing our respective histories and like merging them in some ways, just like our brains melt and sync when you and I are constantly reading each other's minds. Like there's real like depth there because there's real trust there. And I think that's the true like emphasis and reason why we do relationships, is that we deal with such serious and complex thought and politic all the time, that we need to necessarily have such social, like we need to have social trust. And in order to have social trust with one another, we have to surrender all of like our own like baggage and trauma and like bullshit in order to meet each other where we are, where that person is. And so not a day goes by where I don't think about the ways in which I sometimes fail to show up, but I know that you're there to catch me when I am not there. and vice versa. Like, and just because we have this constant way of like checking in with one another, and it's just really, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just think it's really cool.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I've been sitting with this a lot too. You know, we Love Intersections, we talk about relationships a lot, and I've over the past year have really learned or uncovered sort of, this is, you know, where am I going with this? Oh, right. Thinking about, going back to the conversation about how are we shifting values, and thinking about how do we value, what sort of labor do we value as well. Like I learned, and this kind of goes back to also how do we organize, right? How are we, you know, understanding the politics, but also how are we organizing? And I learned this kind of the hard way, because I also, you know, Jen, I work with you a lot, quite a bit, and we also are hyper efficient, mainly because of, as you mentioned, the way that we work really well together. But in other work that I've tried to do, where we don't necessarily have that same relationship, and I do this thing where I used to have a motto, like if an email doesn't need to be written, don't send it. If a meeting doesn't need to be had, don't have the meeting. Like just be efficient with people's time.
Yeah.
And I had done this in this particular project. And what happened was that I had skipped over a lot of conversation, because I was like, oh, do we then need to have another meeting about this? Do we have to have another meeting about this? And what I didn't realize, and this is where what I wasn't valuing, is in those meetings that were repeating and repeating and well, maybe in my mind was repeating and repeating and repeating. It wasn't repeating. And when I look back at those minutes, new things were kind of coming up a little bit. It kind of went like this, but new things would kind of come up every time. And in those relationship building conversations, right, trust was being built. And if I skip over the time that it takes, oh my God, relationships just take so time.
Who wants to sit in a like meeting all the time? But it's how we forge these like trust and connections, because you're learning new things about how each person works. And you and I have talked about this at length in how we do like these kinds of meetings. Is like, I've always said like, hey, let's show up in a way where we can then also communicate, like, this is how stress looks like for me. This is how I am going to communicate when I am full of anxiety, or I'm sick, or I'm depressed. And so, you know, like, feel the like comfort to like feel that you need the trust there in order to be able to communicate those things to each other, in order to build a healthy working relationship. But it's just not something that is like taught, you know, in school, or like you don't learn that growing up, certainly.
Yeah. I thought, why don't we, oh my goodness, how did it become?
I know this.
Oh my God.
we once again, we over prepared because we have so much that we wanted to talk about today.
Well, let's cover something. I'm curious, like, it's been 7 years since we started Love Intersections. What were some of the memorable moments for you?
Well, I loved that we created a gag line for Pride in Chinatown. Maybe it was like 2 years ago, I can't remember.
Yes.
Where we created this gag gift line, and we had ginseng poppers. Oh, they're on my shelf somewhere. These are all fake, obviously. Ginseng poppers, white tears lube, and
horny goat weed.
And so I want to do a shout out to our dear friend Kimberly Wong and Gavin, who helped put that line together for us. And you know, I think like that was such a fun moment. I have other moments too in terms of like filming, but why don't you share one of yours? Because
well, it has to be like the opportunity to take the films and show them elsewhere.
You went to like Japan and like Pakistan.
Pakistan and South Africa, because we got into different film festivals, and so we had an opportunity to go to these places. And you also went to Amsterdam as well. And it was just, I had this, it was really interesting showing the work in different places, and the different conversations that would come up. I mean, this happens, you know, when we show them in any different workshops. People obviously have different engagements with work, but it's also sort of, I've learned, like, there were so many, for example, like when I showed it in Japan, we spent an hour talking about transphobia when I was showing our 6x6 series, and there's not a lot of heavy trans content in the 6x6 from what I remember. But that was what was reflecting from the community. Similarly, like when I showed it in Lahore in Pakistan, like there was, we spent quite a bit of time talking about accessibility. That one was a little bit more obvious because I showed the film with Amar. Yeah. But it's also made me think about, like, you know, when you make the art and you have this idea, and, you know, I still, even 7 years in, consider myself like really new to the art thing. But, you know, when you make the art, you have your intentions of the art, but then other people have other reflections on it. And also when you take it to a different context, or when the context shifts, all of a sudden the meaning has different meaning.
It takes on a different meaning. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like I was just gonna, like, I just was thinking about our exhibit last year, Yellow Peril, the Celestial Elements, right? It's an exhibit based on our film Yellow Peril, Queer Destiny, that explores queer East Asian futures. And if people can just remember this, if you remember this timeline, we opened on February 1st, 2020, and it closed April, I think, 10th. 2020. So imagine what was happening during that time, right? Like the galleries closed, and also it was at some gallery, which is in Chinatown. And so all of a sudden in March, at the end of March, this huge spike in anti-Asian racism, the defacing of the vandalism in Chinatown was happening. All of a sudden, this work that we did, that in 2019 had very different meaning on queer East Asian futurities, all of a sudden that futurity shifted quite a bit, and so the work also had different meaning. And I've been sitting with that quite a bit lately.
Well, I think going back to, you know, the how the meaning shifts depending on the context. You know, you and I have talked quite a bit about this, in that every context that we find ourselves in, there's usually like a set agenda, whether that's a panel, or, you know, you take a film to a film screening, and there is, for all intents and purposes, there's an objective, there's a goal, and there's like an agenda for that event. And what is very interesting is that you and I have always been more interested in what is the work that is in that very precise moment. And that work is not necessarily always in congruence with the agenda, objective and goals of that event. And so, you know, it makes sense that on a global scale, when you take our films, which is like very localized and very specific, not just to Vancouver, but to like a kind of queer, POC, intersectional, whatever kind of like narrative, and you take that and you bring that somewhere to, let's say, Lahore, to Japan, like, of course there's going to be, it's going to jumpstart different kinds of meaning in the context that you're in. So that's the new work that need to be interrogated, or to need to be moved and talked about, right? Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense that also in the context of like our art exhibit, that meanings will shift and change all the time, and that in fact, I think these are the moments of surprise that makes us better artists, because we're able to adapt and mutate, if you will. I'm going to use a virus term, because we're able to like adapt to our environment and to think, you know, differently about how we might change and adapt our artwork as whatever has happened in response to whatever is happening in the world.
Yeah. Well, and I think about, like, you know, this is sort of has always been our approach, and maybe it has also been to the detriment maybe of sometimes the quality of work, but the resources we put into is the process and the relationships, right? We go in, we funders really don't like this when we make films, but we don't ever have a script, right? Because we want to do, the film has when we're telling someone else's story, I'm literally editing someone's story, right? In the edit suite, it has to be collaborative and honor their story. And the only way to do that is for them to be really involved, right? And so you can't predetermine what that's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You
What's
mentioned
Jenna? Oh, go ahead.
no, you asked us.
I was just going to ask, what's your journey of being an artist? Because I've mentioned it.
Yeah, we're syncing because that was my question. This is the thing. I think that you and and I can't speak for you, but I know that I have for a very long time. It took me a very long time to be comfortable in calling myself an artist, even though all of my friends and like coworkers were calling me an artist. I think, I think it took me a very long time to call myself one because I think I was dealing with a lot of my own internalized insecurities and imposter syndrome. And I think a lot of it stems from like cultural stereotypes and like the expectations that was placed on me. So like as a society, and like my parents, didn't place any of the like expectations on me. They were just like, go to school, graduate from university, you do you and be happy. That was their only like dream for me. And I did that. And so even if they don't understand exactly what it is that I do, they're happy as long as I'm happy and that I can like support myself. But, I think that there's still fears there in the kind of like stability and security of a more, conventional, stable 9-to-5 kind of job. That being said, I think that for our generation and younger, it's just an impossible feat. Like gone are the days, right? Like where you can have one single career and that's it for the rest of your life. I think that we all have to contend with the gig economy and wear like multiple hats. That's why you and I have our hands and feet in so many projects, because we're not just like ADHD, but we actually like need to survive by putting our hands and feet in everything.
Yeah, it's a running joke. Like whenever I have this, if I get recognized for something or if I'm taking on a new project, my dad's always like, "Is there money? Like, are you making money?" Because I think it is a sort of like, I think like your parents, I think my parents, they had a career job, right? If you can call it that. I don't know what like they went on a specific career trajectory. That was what you did, right?
Yeah.
And so this sort of the freelancing thing and being an artist, I think, and just to echo what you're saying, Jen, like there's this racist trope of the tiger mom, or this narrative that Asians, I think I said this when that horrible, I think it was a McLean's article or something came out, or the one that said, "Are there too many Asians in universities?" I forget where it was.
Oh my God.
But there was like this really, oh no, sorry, I'm remembering there was this, I was interviewed for the Vancouver Sun. This was over 10 years ago. And there was a comment of someone who commented on my article. Don't never read the comments, right? This is before I knew that. And basically this person literally said, well, Asians don't want to have fun. They just, all they want to do is study, right? And like, that doesn't, like, I think about, yes, my parents wanted me to have, they said you could do whatever you want, but we would highly recommend a profession. And that doesn't come from like, you need to do this for the whatever the trope is, like the family honor or whatever. That was not the case. It was literally like have you eaten today? Like, are you?
I see what you did there. Way to let that in as you share the story.
But it really is that. And I just want to quickly mention a quick story of like, I really recognize this also in the film that we did with our friend Haifa. And it's slightly tangential, but in the film Carla and Haifa, Carla, the mom, talks about how she was, it wasn't that Haifa was gay that she was upset about. It was that the visions for Haifa's future that she had in her mind that was going to be a certain way was not going to be a certain way. And that uncertainty for her child, she had concerned about. And then she recognized that, hey, this is Haifa's journey as well, right? And so it's made me think about my parents in a totally different and in a new light as well.
Well, yeah, you come to respect them and empathize with them in a different way, because now, you know, we're now at an age where I remember as a kid, the first, you know, concept of like age was my parents' age, and it was around our age. Like, we're 34 right now. My God, we're turning 35 this year, which is just wild. Okay, so I just want to share this because I don't know if people know this a lot, but you and I are both fire tigers according to Chinese astrology. And so for people who don't know, and this is fascinating, by the way, when I was growing up in Taiwan, if you were a fire tiger, I was forbidden to attend any celebratory auspicious events like weddings and like birthdays, because it is seen, so it's just this like very archaic and superstitious belief that if you're a girl and you're born as a fire tiger, it's the combination of fire and tiger. If you're born as a girl under fire tiger sign, you're seen as like a curse and a destruction to the family structure, societal expectations. Like your like very soul existence will bring down the order of like patriarchy. But if you're a boy born under fire tiger, you're seen as like you're very lucky and you will lead the society into greatness. And so this is also the same for fire horse. And I had an ex-girlfriend once who was a fire horse. And so that year that she was born, 1969, she like in all over Asia. So it happened in like China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and maybe in some parts of Southeast Asia, where that year, 1969, there were a lot of like infanticides. So a lot of like baby girl deaths. It's just despicable. In any rate, I just thought it was to not just to flip this narrative on its head, but to think that actually, you know what, I do bring destruction to patriarchy, and that I do bring down the order of like familial structures and all of the things. So it came true.
Yeah. Well, cheers to that. What a nice way to close Hot Pot Talks.
Listen, we didn't even like reflect on like other guests. I wanted to just say that, you know, your cousin, Kai Chen Tom, was such a delight, especially because we were able to share personal, familial, like family stories for the two of you. And Kai is just such an eloquent speaker, and, you know, the way that she embodies her theory, but also the way that she's a writer, obviously, but she's just like incredible. Who else? I want to shout out like the Aya Collective, you know, Weiling, Lan, Grace, and Sean. They were just so incredible, you know, talking about Edmonton's Chinatown, and their intergenerational relationship was just awe-inspiring. And what I had left from that Hot Pot Talk with them was like, oh, there's just so much we haven't worked out with our own parents that we're working out with our community and the work that we do as like activists and artists. And yeah.
And also, did we talk about Tao to our last guest?
Oh, right. Yeah.
We were comparing, I remember comparing like the benevolent associations, because she's been to them in Kingston, Jamaica, and also in New York and in London, and sort of the similarities, also Afro-Asia encounters. Who else did we talk to? Oh, Karen Tam.
Karen Tam. Yeah, you were on location at the Griffin Art Projects at the gallery, and that was so fun because it was just like a different location for you.
And can I just quickly mention, this didn't come out then, but the Wi-Fi didn't work until a few minutes before, and I was so nervous.
Listen, nobody knows all the behind the scenes panic and like us frantically like, okay, Wi-Fi's not working. There's background noise. Today you had
the first episode, Claire, there was a fire alarm that went off in her studio, and she had to run home, and she actually beamed from her bathroom.
No,
And then
honey, no.
no,
The electricity was down.
the electricity was down.
You had fire alarm today, just now.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. Then I was also going to mention in the second episode with the Dumpling King as well. Matt had to shoot it from his car, and we made a joke. We were like, "Oh my goodness, is every guest going to be in like some sort of different location?"
Well, okay. So if people don't know, like you and I, because we are so efficient working with one another, it allows us to be slightly neurotic, or let's put it this way: we're efficient so that our neuroticism and perfectionism can come out to play, and we really enable that in each other. And so we want things to look perfect, and so sometimes it's a lot of like being in control. And so when let's say the Dumpling King is joining the Hot Pot Talk, in which he is a guest from his car, there's no natural light. Like we're racing against time. It's out of our control, and it is terrifying.
Well, it's also we're not just perfectionists, we're filmmakers. Like people are always like, "Wow, on Zoom calls you're so well lit." Well, hello, honey. Do you think I'm gonna allow myself to be backlit? Not gonna happen. Filmmaker. It's one of my first pandemic purposes.
and my partner is constantly joking because like Jamie is tuning into each Hot Pot Talk live, right? But then like as soon as it's over, he looks over and I've already teared down everything and I'm already in my PJs. Like it's so fast.
Oh.
Well, it's 6:01. What should we do? I mean, we are the boss.
Well, we do have some exciting announcements.
Yes.
We don't have a date set yet, but due to popular demand, and I have to say I was looking at all of the views because these all get stored on our YouTube channel and on various Facebooks, like the Value Facebook and Love Intersections. We've had like over, I think, 1,200 viewers total. And I think they get shared and whatnot. So they do live. If folks have missed episodes and want to share it with their friends, they live on our YouTube channel. But also due to popular demand, we're also going to be, as I mentioned, we're doing this collaboration with the Lim Association. We'd also like to raise them some money. They recently redid their facade. It's gorgeous, by the way. 525 Carroll Street. Go check it out. But we'd like to raise them some money. So we're going to be hosting a private Hot Pot Talks, basically over Zoom. It'll be a conversation between me, Jen, and one of the elders there, Orville, who holds a lot of the stories of the building and the association. We don't have a date yet, but it's going to be likely end of May. So if folks want to just follow us on social media, we'll be spamming you on social media about when that happens. And we'll be selling tickets to try to raise them some funds. Yeah, and we can't fully announce this total new program yet, but I am gonna say it looks like we might in a couple months we'll be able to continue something like this. So yeah, stay tuned. This has been amazing. This has been so fun. It's honestly what has been getting me through week to week. I'm sad that we're gonna have to put it on pause, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a little sad, but I think we can make it work at some point down the near future. We never did talk about, our complexities of Chinatown, but that conversation can happen in a different time. Is there any last minute words, David, that you have for me and vice versa?
I think, Jen, I just echoing what you said earlier, like we're so lucky to be able to do this work, to be able to work together and also to do this work. Like, who would have thought we would be doing something called Hot Pot Talks, right? And having these, talking to these amazing guests too. It's really been honestly an excuse to talk to people that I admire and learn from and bond with, right? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone, this is a wrap. Have a wonderful night, and I shall end the broadcast. Good night.
Good night.